So Innovate UK, we're the UK's innovation agency. We fund and connect businesses to make their ideas a commercial success across priority sectors, I do energy. So very briefly, kind of energy system 101, we're moving from a very centralized system where we were able to manage supply basically by burning fossil fuels quite quickly whenever we wanted, to a far more distributed system where we've got forms of supply like wind and solar which we can't control and are really sporadic. We've also got demand profiles which vary throughout the day, which means we've got peak times which we're not able to fuel with our renewable sources, which means we've got a challenge to try and soften those peaks to decarbonise our energy system. There's also big seasonal variations as well, as you can imagine. So this is an example of a demand profile over several days from different energy sources, and to put it in comparison with the last one, you can see that we don't necessarily have our low carbon energy sources at the same time as high points of demand. So the general message is supply does not equal demand, particularly of low carbon sources, and we've also got challenges about how we manage the grid. It's got a limited amount of capacity. We need to manage the voltage and frequency requirements of the grid constantly as well. So we need to try and find a way of balancing these imbalances. So some of our options are to use our flexible energy sources to meet the peaks in demand, but that generally means burning natural gas. We can also try and control demand profiles, so switch when people are using their energy, or we can do storage, which up until now has been very difficult and very expensive to do. And the fourth option is a little bit of all of the above, and that's probably the reality in the near term at least. So some of the things that we've been thinking about from an energy perspective is electric vehicle uptake and vehicle to grid charging, active buildings, which I'll talk about in a moment, peer-to-peer trading, flexibility services, and bundled service offerings. So vehicle to grid, you're probably all aware that we ran a number of competitions at the end of last year to fund vehicle to grid competition projects. We got 21 of those funded, and they kicked off in Q1 of this year. And there's all sorts of benefits to it. It helps us. We found there's a commercial incentive for it. You can engage with markets through national grids, and potentially per vehicle between £200 to £2,000 you can generate in revenue by entering the frequency markets. But there's also benefits for building owners, so they can self-consume from microgeneration. Energy suppliers have better settlements. You can trade between parties, etc. So our next step is to look at what are the other barriers essentially to electric vehicle uptake, and one of those is on-street charging infrastructure. So about 43% of households in the UK don't have access to off-street charging, so that acts as a significant barrier. If I want to buy an electric vehicle, if I'm unable to charge it, it's going to be something that I think twice about. So we've been scoping out over the last couple of months what a competition should look like. These are some of the things that people are doing at the moment. So we're all about innovation, but this is mental, right? So we want to try and design some better on-street infrastructure which doesn't take up all the pavement, which is easy to use and safe, etc. Going back to some of the energy things, so a challenge with some of the energy products is we can reduce people's demand or consumption, but actually it's quite a small commercial incentive for people. So we might be talking just like £50 a year or so, and we're struggling to get people to change their energy supplier, which typically you might save £300 annually by doing. So one of the solutions is to try and bundle energy products, things that you most be familiar with might be your smart thermostats, etc., with other products like security. So if your energy usage is being monitored and you're on holiday, your lights go on in your home, you get an alert saying something's going on in your home. We can also do healthcare diagnostics by seeing if people's behavior changes within their house. If you start urinating through the night or something, then it might be an early indicator of health problem. And anyway, one of the things is transport. We can start to bundle service offerings with transport. And that takes me on to one of the projects that we funded through the Vehicle to Grid competition, which was led by a company called Octopus Energy. And they've now got an offering where they give your vehicle lease, your MOT, your energy supply, insurance, all bundled together as one offering, monthly fee, and they also take control of your vehicle to do vehicle to grid charging, and they make the revenue that they make off that. Another important thing about the electric vehicle is it's becoming a bit of a trend that we have domestic storage in buildings, which allows people to utilize the solar on their roofs. If you don't have storage, actually most of that doesn't get used most of the time. Typically around 60% just doesn't get used. So we're installing batteries, but if everyone's got an electric vehicle out the front, then we can use that as a really big battery. So this is good news. And what we could then call these is active buildings, ones which can interact with the energy system and help with this balancing of supply and demand. Moving on from that, you can also start trading it with your neighbours. So if you've got your vehicle parked and you're not using it, you've got cheaper energy source than your neighbours are getting from the wholesale market, then they might start trading with you. It starts to get a lot more complicated, and this is one of the challenges I'm going to pose to you, is historically we've metered buildings. We've got a meter point, and energy supply becomes responsible for that meter, and that's how the transactional basis is. With vehicles, we start having a move-in energy source and supply, and then we have to start metering people potentially from multiple suppliers. There is also two-way flows of energy from the consumer to either another consumer or the grid, etc. So it becomes quite a complicated situation. So to bring this back to the topic of today, of connected and autonomous vehicles, one of the dilemmas that we're in is that we need to decarbonise transport pronto. We're kind of looking at how we plan and put the infrastructure in place, and if we want to do it really quickly, we need to get a move on now. But with autonomy, it changes the model of how people might charge their vehicles. It could change the ownership models of vehicles. So it gives us a bit of a dilemma about, do we just design for today, or do we design for the full autonomy that might become quite prevalent in 15 to 20 years or so? And that's one of the ways that you can help us. So data from the vehicle can help us understand people's mobility around a locality and help us to plan charging infrastructure. We could start controlling vehicles remotely when they charge and discharge using the connections on the vehicles. One of the ideas is that we can direct electric vehicles to places with surplus capacity, so that they can service the grid at those times. And also the connectivity of the vehicle will facilitate transactional handshakes in the way that I just described. There's also loads of stuff that I'm sure we haven't thought of so far. So my ask of all you today, and I know there's a lot of people from local authorities, is to just consider the energy needs when you're working on your transport projects and initiatives. There will be people in your authority who work on this stuff all the time. Go and have a chat to them, talk about how your projects can complement each other. Go to your distribution network operator. If you're doing anything with electric vehicles, the distribution networks are really interested in knowing what's going on and how it might help them service the local distribution network. You can find out quite easily who they are, and if you need contacts or anything, come to me. Question how connected vehicles could support electricity grid flexibility. I know a lot of you are probably focused on mobility and looking at multimodal transport, etc. But try and keep this in mind as something that not only is a helpful thing to do from my point of view, but it's also a potential commercial revenue stream as well. And finally, think about how the data from your vehicles can be used and made available to other players. And in this instance, I'm thinking of energy people. So it's been really good to hear that there's enthusiasm to create open data streams. They would be really useful for us as well. So that's all from me. Thank you. I'll catch you at the break if anyone has any questions.